In this video, we will create a repository and then turn that repository into a website, a very basic website. Now, how do we create a repository? I need to be signed into the GitHub account, and to make sure I'm signed in, I kind of just have to click on this and then I can see whether I'm signed in or not. Now, to create a repository, we could click on many things. We could create a repository here, click on the Start a Project button, or up here, if I click on the plus icon, then underneath I could click on New Repository, which I will do now. Then, within the only account I have at the moment, I need to give a name to the repository, and at the moment it could be really anything, as you can see, but once you have loads of repositories, then they have to have unique names. I just call this web01, and then description is, as you can see, it's optional, but it's always good to call it something. It's good to be somewhat organized from the onset. Let's say my first website. Okay, now there are options whether the repository should be public or private. Now, it's free to create a private repository, but it's not free to turn a private repository at the moment. It's 2020, June 2020. So at the moment, it's not free to turn a private repository into a GitHub for free. So we will use a public repository. And that's perfectly fine because you actually want people to see your website. And if you have to keep something that needs to be private, you can keep it on your computer or in a separate account. Now, I just leave it on default, public. And then now a README file is usually, well, I'd say most of the time, a good idea to have in the repositories because it explains other people, and sometimes it reminds you what you're actually doing in the repository in a text file. But for our purposes here in this tutorial series, I guess, we will not set up this README file. So what we will do is we will just ignore these two as well. There it is. I was looking for the box. Why wasn't it there? Anyway, so I have to make sure it's unclicked, okay, for this video tutorial. Then I ignore these two drop-down menus and just click on Create Repository. Okay, and then what we see here is the root of our repository called web01, and then because we didn't set up the README file, so there are no files at the moment in the repository, GitHub gives me these options. So what we will do is we will create a new file in a second, but first I'd like to show you what actually has happened. Okay, so if I click on the username here, then it kind of goes back in some kind of overview mode. If I click on GitHub, the GitHub icon, then it goes into one of the main pages, I guess, that you see when you are signed in. And then here you can find your repositories under this sidebar, or you could just go to your account icon and then click on your repository. So at the moment we have one repository here, and then I clicked on it and we don't see anything. So it's the same screen as before. Okay, so we just click on create a new file. And because we are dealing with websites here, we need to call it index.html. Okay, and then we can write the source code for that index file. So what I will just do is I will say hello. I could say hello world. That's what most people do. Anyway, so then I save this file. I could just click on preview, but it doesn't really give me anything interesting because it looks exactly the same without tags styling code. So what I just do is I scroll down, and when GitHub says commit new file or commit to changes later, it actually, well, in this case, it means save a new file, or later it will say commit to the changes, meaning just save the file. Okay, so here you could give some notes to this action we are doing, which is just making a file, but we could go with this default note here that GitHub gave you. Now, I clicked on the green button. Okay, so you could read these tips, but I just dismiss for now. Okay, so we have one of these index. We have one file in our repository, and in that one file, if I click on it, we can see that we have one line of code. Okay, if I want to edit this line, then I have to go to this icon, the pencil icon, and then click on it. Okay, and now in editing mode, I can see how many lines I have. Maybe I just say second line. Oops, that's not second line here. Okay, now here you see commit changes. I click on it, and that's it. Now question is, how do I tell GitHub that I'd like this repository to be considered a website, Now I need to go into the, settings of this repository, which is over here, not the settings of my account, which would be, my mouse is super sensitive today. The account settings are here, which we are not going to change now. So if I go back to the repository and then click on this button here, the settings, then I go into the settings of this repository. Okay, so I scroll down. I could change the repository name anytime. There are a few more things that we are not going to worry about for a while, for a long time. What we will do in this video, as I said, is we will turn this repository into a website. And the websites in GitHub are called GitHub pages. Okay, so what we will have to do is, in this part of the page, we have to select the master branch of this repository to be the source of our website. So I just changed that. The page refreshed itself, and now on the top we see GitHub pages source saved. Okay, so that's it. Now we scroll down where we were a couple of seconds ago, and we see that something was added to this part of the video. So your site is ready to be published at this URL. Now, what I will do is I just copy this URL to my clipboard. So on the Apple computer is Command C, Windows would be Control C, and Linux, I don't know, but I guess if you use Linux, you know. So I copied this to my clipboard, then I go back to the root of the repository where you see your files. And then if I click on this edit button, then I can add this URL. I just remind you that there is a dot at the end of this memory. I just copied at the end of that line. We don't need that dot, so I'm removing it. And then I save it. And what we did, we kind of just created a node. Oops, my mouse is too sensitive again. For ourselves, so that we don't have to remember or take a note somewhere, perhaps in this file, when it comes to what our website's URL is. So anyway, what I'm saying here is that we just added a quick reminder for ourselves in the root of the repository when it comes to where the website is. Okay, so what I will do is I'll open this website in a new tab. I was planning to do that, but it didn't work. So that would be Control and click. And what I can see is that there is an error message. It says there isn't a GitHub Pages site here. And this could be worrying, but I'm not too worried because sometimes in GitHub, most of the time, the changes to the website they take time, sometimes seconds and sometimes a bit longer. I'll talk about this in another video, but let's just get this done. I refresh and there it is. Now, as you can see, the second line text is not actually in the second line. And that is because if in HTML we wanted to have the second line in the second line, we would have to have a line break in here. So I think that's it for now. We now know how to create a repository, which is perhaps just this one. We know how to turn that repository into a website. And that is down here. We just check the master branch. And we also know that for a website, usually we have to set up an index file. And in this case, it's the index.html file. So I see you in the next video, I hope.